when it goes, when it goes onto YouTube, I will be chopping out everybody's photos anyway, and it will just be me. So don't worry. If you can mute, if you can, I think everybody's muted. Yep, that's fine. Awesome. So as I say, closed captions are on if you want them. And let us begin. Now, better look at actually at the camera that's up there. Hi, I'm Kev. I have loved ancient Egypt for a long time. Actually, I better start with some of the other things. Because this is being recorded, I better mention this, as I've mentioned to the live audience here. It's 31 degrees in this room with all the blinds, doors and everything shut, and the cameras and lights are all on. And I'm just recovering from flu. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I might have edited out any of the coughing. But the poor audience here are going to have to endure it. So, right, let's start proper. So, hi, I'm Kev. I have loved ancient Egypt since I was a child. A book I found in the school library at the age of around 11 was full of ancient Egyptian stories, and it blew my mind. I then just couldn't get enough of it, and I've loved ancient Egypt ever since. So this series of stories, and this is all part of my sort of out of COVID, now we've had it, it's been put off for like 3 years, is my national tour. I've already done not the Glastonbury. I'll try to get an invite for that. I applied, but didn't get to perform there. But I did Glastonbury Town back in May. I'm supposed to have done Atlantis Bookshop in July, but that's now postponed to October. I'm then doing a Sheffield gig and maybe some in November in Croydon. Well, Croydon's off, but I'm gonna have to relocate that somewhere else. So, but on this tour, I'm stopping here at the wonderful PBH Free Fringe, which I've done last year as well, with a similar set of stories, but in a different order, and a few new ones. So, let's begin. The first story is one of the oldest in my collection. It's from Old Kingdom. Nebka had a problem. He wasn't going to tell Pharaoh this, not just yet, but he would have to. You see, being architect to the Great Pyramid comes with certain responsibilities. And this particular responsibility they had a problem with was the spell used for the final sealing of the tomb to protect Pharaoh. Now, he had picked this up, this knowledge, from the great Imhotep, great architect Imhotep, and he needed this particular spell, but he couldn't find it. Now, the pyramid would take quite a long time to build, so he had plenty of time, he thought, to try and locate it. Well, the years went by, and he had no luck. It got to the point where he really probably should tell Pharaoh. But again, he held out. He tried all the various libraries and all the temples. No joy. This was getting a little bit tricky. Okay, so finally, regrettably, he had to tell Pharaoh. Now, he thought he would probably get into a lot of trouble because this is a big deal for Pharaoh. Big pyramid, eternity, afterlife and all that. If he didn't get the spell that protected Pharaoh's body, he could have been losing his own. But Pharaoh was understanding. He summoned his 5 sons and sent them on a quest, on a mission to scour Egypt and find where this particular spell could be found, or if not, find someone who might know. Well, they were gone for weeks, north, south, into the depths, even to other countries. But his elder son eventually returned a few weeks later and said, I know someone. I have found somebody who possibly could help. His name is Teta. He's over 101 years old. He is an absolute fountain of knowledge and wisdom and magic. He is so powerful that I think he could find out this spell for you. So, of course, Pharaoh demanded Teta to be brought to him. So Hardep, taking a platoon of soldiers, journeyed to Teta's village. The sudden appearance of a lot of armed soldiers in a very remote and quite poor village caused quite a stir. But not for Teta. He was sat outside his mud hut having his lunch, oblivious to the commotion that these soldiers, who pretty much outnumbered the whole village, as they approached, with all the villagers crowding round to see why such a magnificent spectacle was coming to their village. Hardep laid down Pharaoh's command that he should appear before him. Teta, halfway through eating and drinking, gave a sour look at why someone would disturb him, even though he is Crown Prince of Egypt. With a shrug, he agreed. After he'd finished his lunch, he would go. It was a big lunch. Eventually, they were underway. Full military escort to the palace. And finally, Teta was standing before Pharaoh. This in itself was causing some murmurs amongst the court in the palace. Most people were expected to be on their knees at the very least, preferably their face fully on the floor within sight of Pharaoh. But no, not Teta. He was there, resting upon his staff, glaring at the living God king. Obviously, the king was not too happy about this, not showing common courtesy to your king, but he knew this was an important task. He had to at least give him some room. So standing, Pharaoh looked down upon Teta. So, Teta, how come a man of your power and ability has never been known to me before? Why have I never had you in this palace? Teta's reply shocked a number. Well, Pharaoh, my king, he who has not been summoned will not appear. That was a gasp. Such impertinence. Pharaoh tried very hard to hide his anger. Had this been any other person, Teta would have lost his head immediately. But no, this was important. He will let that slide. So Teta, I understand You are a man of great magic. I demand a demonstration. I have heard that you can reattach the head that has been severed. Teta nods. Guards, bring in a prisoner. But Teta interrupts. Again, very bad. No, my king. Let not be a prisoner harmed. Bring in a goose. Pharaoh waves and lets it happen. And so a goose is brought before Teta. The head is severed. The head is placed one side of the palace of the court and the body on the other. Teta takes a step back, raises his arms and utters his magic. Words that no one understood. But something miraculous then begins to happen. The head rolls and the body stands and waddles over. And the head and the body fuse and the goose is alive. That is miraculous. A gasp around the court. Pharaoh is obviously pleased, but gives a smile and a nod. Let us see an ox. Teta grimaces, but a nods in. Quick. Nods in acceptance. And so an ox is brought in. The head is severed and repeat the body and the head. He performs his magic and the two combine. Pharaoh, suitably happy that Teta is a man of power, begins to ask the question for the real reason why he has summoned him. So Teta, there is a spell that is required to seal my pyramid, my tomb, and to protect my body for eternity. But it has been lost. Do you know where it can be found? Now we get into a coughing fit. Teta mulls this question. No, my king, I do not know where it is. Pharaoh's face darkens with anger. He is about to summon the guard to take Teta away, for his usefulness has now expired. When Teta gestures, one moment, my king. I do not know, but I do know who does know. Pharaoh is not happy with this little trick. The wife of the high priest of the Temple of Ra, Remenet, she will bear a son. Her son will find the casket in the temple that contains the spell. Pharaoh relaxes somewhat and begins to gesture. He begins to summon the guards to bring Renanette to him and give her all the protection and wealth that she needs to ensure she is in favour with the king. Oh dear. Thought I was going to get through this one without coughing. Nearly there. But again, Teta gives a slight smile. He is clearly playing with Pharaoh. But, my king, her son will sit upon your throne after you. Pharaoh stops. He does not like this game that Teta is playing. He changes his order to bring Renanette here and have her executed instead. But again, Teta messing with the head of Pharaoh. Gestures again. Fear not, my king, for while her son sits upon your throne after you, your sons will follow him. But he has to sit upon your throne so that he can read the spell, and it will protect yours and his pyramid as well. Pharaoh is not happy, but lets this go. So as time passes, the pyramid is built. Pharaoh dies and is buried. Renanette's son becomes the pharaoh of the first pharaoh of the sixth dynasty. He finds the spell within the tomb, within the casket, within the temple of Ra. And at his burial, the spell is read, his tomb is sealed, and that of his predecessor. And so the pyramids still stand. Not quite sealed, but still surviving for eternity. Okay, that was Teta. Almost got through that without coughing, but hey, hopefully that wasn't too disruptive for anyone. Now, okay, everyone's quiet. Not to worry. Right, so this next one is my absolute favorite story. And it was definitely from this book that I found in the school library when I was 11. It's called The Doomed Prince. For me, I think it captures pretty much every fairy tale sort of trope from that point onwards. If you've ever read the 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, tongue, but also other fairy tales that have come since then, so many of these tropes are still within these stories. Once upon a time, there was a pharaoh and his queen. They loved one another very much. And Egypt was prosperous. It was safe. And all was well within the country, except for one thing. They had no heir. Now, as the years went past, this became a problem. And Pharaoh's vizier often whispered in Pharaoh's ear that he should find another wife. there needs to be a successor to the throne. But no, Pharaoh and his wife loved one another. They would not take others. People began to talk. They decided this needed to be resolved urgently, for there could be a revolt if there was no successor to the throne. So what they decided to do was to visit every temple of Egypt and petition all the gods and goddesses to provide them with a child, to bless them. And so they began their journey up and down the Nile to all of the primary temples. And the gods heard and made their blessing. As the queen reached the time of birth, they settled back to the palace. Now, when a child is born in Egypt, the 7 Hathors declare the fate of that child. Now, this being both the child of Pharaoh, the living god, and one that has been blessed by all of the gods and goddesses, this was a very special visit by the 7 Hathors. And their proclamation was audible to the whole palace as the child was born. No one needed to come and rush to Pharaoh to tell him. He heard it very clearly. When the child was born, it was a boy. And the 7 Hathors declared that this boy will meet his fate through either a snake, a dog, or a crocodile. Now, this child was precious to both of them, for they thought they would probably never have another. And so, for the fate of Egypt, they decided to make the child to be very safely cared for. They needed to be sure that there was no risk of any of those harming the new prince. They sent him inland, far from the rivers, far from crocodiles and the risk of snake, to a small house on a dirt track, far inland. They left him with a whole house full of servants who would be watching him constantly, ensuring his safety, education, and development for when he would be the rightful king of Egypt. Now, as children grow, they can be little terrors, and this prince was no different. From a young age, he would disrupt things and be adventurous. For the poor child was in this house all alone, except for the servants. Entertainment was hard to come by. Therefore, he made his own, usually by climbing the trees in the garden, or hide and seek, or doing things he probably shouldn't be doing. But with so many servants around, he was at no risk of harm. His tutor, that he spent quite a lot of time with, who educated him in language of the history and geography of his kingdom that he will have, never strayed far from him. And usually every evening they would end up sat on the roof of the house as the blessed cooling, really could do with the cooling now, cooling night air descends. just observing passers-by and so on. One particular day, when the prince was maybe around 7, 8 years old, observed a child of similar age walking along the dirt road, carrying some bags. There was a creature with him, and it was running circles round him and jumping around and making these strange noises. The young prince questioned his tutor, what is this animal? The tutor froze. He knew. This, my prince, is a greyhound. Ah, he looks so much fun. They're playing well together and enjoying their company. I would want one. I would like some company like that. Now, the tutor was well aware that dogs, snakes, and crocodiles were not to be messed with, that they would be a threat to the king, future king. And he brushed aside this thought in the prince. It didn't work though for very long. For days after, the prince asked about this dog and kept begging for having one, just to have some fun, because you adults really aren't that fun. Obviously, the tutor had to pass word back to Pharaoh, and he knew the answer would be no. But the tutor loved his little prince, and thinking that with this house being so well safe and everyone being observant of the prince, having a little dog won't be a problem. Slightest chance there could be a problem, the dog will go, no question. And so the tutor went and obtained a greyhound pup. The prince loved the little dog. They were inseparable. And all was well, though they kept their beady eyes on this dog. The boy and his dog grew. They were constantly at play. And over the years, the young boy became a young man. It was not long before he would be eligible to take on the throne. But Pharaoh was adamant that the boy should remain there for a little while longer. The boy was no longer happy with just climbing trees and hide and seek, even with his dog. He yearned to see outside these walls, for he had never been outside. He'd learned everything from the tutor about what should be out there in his kingdom, but he would like to see it with his own eyes and experience the people and the kingdom that he will eventually rule. He was not happy his father would not let him leave. But he had a plan. It was a very cunning plan. One night, once everybody was asleep, the prince sneaked down quietly to the stables, found a horse and one of the chariots that the servants used to get to the next village, and slowly and quietly cooked them up. He had to frequently quieten the dog down because the dog was getting a bit excited with this, whatever this excitement thing was, because this was new. But he packed a few belongings, a few bit of food and water and beer, and carefully and quietly opened the gate to the house and took them out into the darkness. He rode the chariot as fast as he could with his dog beside him in the chariot with him. He was determined for adventure. Problem being, he needed some kind of story because he had good clothes. How could he would stand out, and there would obviously be search parties coming for him. So what could he make up as his story? He couldn't obviously say he was the Prince of Egypt. That would be, people will tell. And no, he had to have something better. The chariot. The chariot was a good idea. He could say that his father had had a new wife, and he didn't get on with his stepmother. His father was a charioteer in the Pharaoh's army. So he decided, perhaps, to take the chariot and leave home to seek adventure. That sounded quite plausible. Not sure what to do about the clothing, but, he's all could be up for a bit of thievery. So out he goes, living on his wits with his dog, hunting and thieving what he could find. This was a fantastic adventure. For weeks and then months, he began to relax. There was no sign of being found. His clothes were by now quite dusty and disheveled, and certainly not the fine garments they once were. And his made up story from the occasional time he had to give it seemed to be plausible enough, and no one suspected his true identity. So he wanted to explore his country. He followed the roads, heading north. Eventually, he realized he was getting close to the edges of Egypt. He was curious about his neighboring countries because official negotiations, obviously, between countries would be a very useful thing to do. And to understand the people themselves would be quite educational. So he took that step with his chariot onwards. He found a busy road full of traffic of trade, rich cargoes being going. He knew ahead was possibly one of the big cities, the city of Bekten. He knew that was a place to go. And heading towards it, he crossed the gate, through the gateway of this immense city. The sight and sounds and smells overwhelmed him. They were radically different to what he had experienced in his own country and the smaller cities. This was a different world. Throngs through the streets, and he slowly rode his chariot towards the central market stall where everybody seemed to be heading. Eventually, when he realized he couldn't go any further with the chariot, parked it up and made the dog stay. This time he was going to go on foot and explore. Following the sights and smells and sounds of people and the traders, he congregated into the central market area. It was amazing, so different. He then heard something other unusual thing coming from the far corner of the court of the market square, and headed over. There was cheering, which was unusual. So He joined the throngs, and it was an unusual spectacle. Nudging a passerby, he gestured, what's this going on? The guy just looked at him, surprised, and said, "You're not round here, are you?" He gestured to a tower that stood in the corner of the courtyard. Around the base were the throngs of people cheering as a figure climbed, roughly gripping protruding rocks from the rocky and cracked exterior of the tower up the wall, who would then reach a height and somehow lose their footing and fall plummeting to the ground to a great cheer. The prince was a little bit surprised at this, but the man explained. The prince who is responsible for this city has a beautiful daughter, and he was fed up of the constant stream of suitors for her hand. He decided to forget that and create a challenge instead. He proclaimed that should anyone climb to her window at the top of this tower, whoever got through that window could claim her hand in marriage. It didn't put the suitors off. Well, it only put them off once, because most of them would end up dead on the floor. But the stream continued, but at least he didn't have to deal with it. The prince was, yeah, this is an interesting new way of dealing with it. So he looked upon this tower, and being the avid climber and experienced one since childhood, he could see where most of these people were going wrong. And as he followed up the track that he was trying to observe, he saw a figure at the window. It was the princess, who looked glumly down at yet another splattered body on the floor. At that moment, she looked up, and their eyes met. The prince fell in love. He couldn't see a huge amount, but those eyes were just incredible. He knew he had to make that climb. And slowly, and so, he swaggered to the base of this tower, where all the other suitors, obviously of royal blood, looked upon this disheveled, ragamuffin creature, filthy thing that stood before them, and just laughed. But they didn't laugh for very long. They slowly noticed there was something about this man, this scruffy, dirty man. There was a bearing, a noble bearing. He held himself with such confidence that they stopped laughing and welcomed him in, curious as to who he was. Of course, he related his story about being a runaway from a stepmother he didn't like. And they accepted it. His words seemed so plausible. And he joined their merry little band and learned all about the predecessor that have tried. He joined them at their camp and explained he would have a try. They accepted him as one of their own, although no one knew really why they would have done that, considering his appearance. Following morning, the young prince made his climb. There was a few scary moments where he almost lost it, but he was very sure of his route. And so he made it through the window, much to the great cheer, this time, of happiness rather than ridicule, because he actually made it this time. Now, news of this reached the Prince of Becten very quickly. And as our young prince and the princess walked to each other to embrace, the door was burst open with loads of soldiers intent on dealing with this roughy, scruffy creature that was supposed wanting to take the hand of the princess. She interceded, stood in front of him. She told the soldiers, should anyone touch him, I will throw myself from this window right now. Obviously, the guards, utterly shocked at this, refused to make any movement. And so our young prince was summoned before the Prince of Becten. Again, our young prince gave his story of being a charioteer's son. The Prince of Becten, again, like the others, accepted this very ropey story and detected this air of charisma, of nobility that was not evident in his appearance. And so the Prince of Becten accepted that this should happen. Perhaps with a good wash, he might be more presentable as a prince. Obviously, our prince kept his secret. The prince and princess were married, but the prince couldn't give all his secrets up yet. But what he did tell her was still the same story. Days into their wedding, they stayed at the palace. And the days and weeks went by. The prince was in heaven. This was incredible what he was experiencing. This was incredible love and the palace. And is this what it's like to be in a royal court? All he knew was just his dusty old house. One night, with the prince going in bed, the princess was preparing herself for bed. She turned and saw a serpent slithering across the floor of the bedchamber towards the sleeping prince. She utterly loved her husband, and for no thought of her own safety, grabbed her hairpin and leapt at the snake, stabbing it through the head. The noise and excitement woke the prince, and he saw the dead snake. He had to tell the princess about these dooms that lay upon him. The snake has gone, but there was still the dog and the crocodile. Obviously, the queen, his wife, the princess, his wife, looked upon that little greyhound childhood friend of the prince and said, shall we get rid of him? But the prince, no, he would not part with his faithful greyhound. He was adamant that that dog was no threat to him. He had been with him since childhood. They were best of friends. He would lay his life for his dog, and the dog would do likewise. But the princess would watch that dog secretly. And so days would continue after that. And the prince, while out on his daily morning walk with his greyhound along the riverbank, encountered something unusual. His dog, as he threw some sticks for him, ran ahead. A huge flock of birds launched into the sky, causing quite a shriek. And the dog ran back, his teeth bared and growling. At that moment, the prince thought perhaps he was wrong about his dog, and his dog had turned. The prince ran and ran, but he knew he could not escape his dog. His dog was very fast. His only option was to jump into the water. That would slow his dog down. And so the prince leapt. And then he realized his mistake. The dog was not chasing him to attack him, but his dog had spotted a crocodile around the corner of the bend in the river and was there to alert him. But that was too late, for the crocodile had sensed somebody in the water and was making a move to the prince. The dog leapt from the bank into the water and swam to his prince just as the crocodile caught up. The dog and crocodile fought as the prince made it back to the bank, and the prince watched helplessly as the torrent of water turned red and then was still. Onto the surface of the water popped the still body of the crocodile and the still body of the dog. Prince, distraught, for his dog must be dead, went back into the water and carried out his childhood friend. And taking it back to the palace, tears streaming, he presented it to his wife and said, "All these dooms have now been complete. My dog has saved me from the crocodile, and the dog I thought was going to be my doom. I can tell you now, my wife, my true identity, for I am a prince of Egypt. I am the next in line for the throne, and I have been seeking to fight against the God's will on how I will die, and now I have defeated them. I am ready to return to Egypt and claim my throne." She was gobsmacked, absolutely amazed at this revelation, and the news traveled fast around the palace. Of course, the prince had to return home. He returned with his wife and a retinue of soldiers who escorted him back to the throne. Pharaoh and his wife were over the moon to be reunited with their son, for they were worried where he had gone. They thought they had lost him. And when the young prince related all that had happened, Pharaoh said, "I will stand down and let you be the rightful king of Egypt." And they lived happily ever after. I love that story. All those tropes, assumed identity, climbing a tower to rescue a princess, happy ever after, fighting all these things. It's fantastic. It is. I just love it. And I did that one without coughing. Yes. I would celebrate, but this is just squash. Righty ho. Okay, looks like we've lost a couple. Never mind. They can get this on Zoomy Zoom. You're on the Zoomy Zoom. On YouTube later. Right. Next, what was it? Now, normally when I do this show, my next one will be a story based on the harem conspiracy. Now, seeing I did that actually as the opening story to my show I did last week, so you can get that on YouTube when I throw you these links. I might actually skip that one and change it for one that I haven't done for a while. It's similar. The one that I would do, because this is the story on sort of magic part, although Teta was a magic-y one. The harem conspiracy, it's a really good story, especially my twist on it. It's a good one. You need to watch it. So what I'll do instead is one it's part of the Contendings of Horus. And this is the birth of Isis and Osiris. Let's just make sure I can remember it. Yeah, I think I've got it. Ra, great god Ra, strolled through his private garden of the palace. This new earth, this new world that had just been created, he adored all his creations. And within his garden, he had the best specimens of all the trees and plants that he had created. And he loved to come here every morning and every noon, in between his court sittings for all those that he ruled upon as first pharaoh of the earth of Egypt. But this garden was a moment that he could use to get his thoughts in gear and give a break from all the pettiness that these humans seem to come up with. But as the hours went past, he knew he had to return back to listen to the next load of petitions. Sitting once again upon his throne in his court, surrounded by representatives of the varying tribes in Egypt and his children in human form, he looked upon the next couple who were seeking his decision on something and wishing something would be more interesting. They were about to make their request to Ra when a disturbance at the back of the entrance of the court caught everybody's attention. Ra could make out it was his son, Thoth, the god of wisdom. He was eagerly trying to get through the crowds. And when he stood in front of his father, Ra, he was quite worn out and breathless. But he was also eager to tell him something. And before his father could make a move, Thoth stood and looked upon all of those assembled. My father Ra, I have a new prophecy I have uncovered. It needs to be spoken. Hushed fell upon the court. Even Ra kept quiet. A new prophecy, eh? I am the creator of all, and I am not aware of this. What does my son have that I do not know? Once the room was quiet, Thoth began. Nut Our goddess Nut shall have 5 children, and one of those shall be the next king of Egypt, who will replace our father Ra upon this throne. Now that came as a bit of a revelation to everybody, more so to Ra, because he was of the opinion that, being immortal, he was not going to give the throne up. In fact, he was not actually intending to ever give the throne up. So why would someone come along and take the throne from him? That would not go down well. No, 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 no. Ra stood up and looked at his son, Thoth. I counter that prophecy. Nut shall never have a child, not on any day or night of the year. I forbid it. Ra then sat down, happy that his commandment would be observed. There was no way that prophecy was ever going to encounter. That counter brought silence once again to the court, all except for one, and that was the sound of sobbing. All heads turned to the sound, and their hearts fell sad. For the goddess Nut lay curled on the floor, sobbing her eyes out, with her husband Geb around him, comforting her the best he could. The court decided to leave, including Ra, who did not want to face this. That left Thoth alone with these 2 distraught people. And alone, he approached them. He knelt down and reassured them that he will help them. The prophecy must be fulfilled. He has seen it being fulfilled, therefore it will happen. This brought some relief to Nut, and through her tears she thanked Thoth in every way she could. Thoth departed and looked through his many scrolls and explored many secrets known only to the great god of wisdom. And he thought he had found a way to beat Ra and defy Ra and combat his decree. It was a cunning way. It should work. It will take some effort though, but he knew very well what he could do. So Thoth visited his brother Khonsu, god of the moon. Now Khonsu was an avid gambler. He was very good at his game. He liked to play Senet, and he was very good. Not many people won against him on that game. But also Khonsu was almost, Thoth had to say almost, but not quite as good as Thoth in his control of magic and wisdom. Though Khonsu was mostly to do with more of the darker aspects of the magic, the nighttime magic. But still, Thoth wasn't gonna push away the power and say Khonsu wasn't that great. He was good. So Thoth challenged him to some games of Senet. They played well, very well, evenly matched. And with a few wins against Khonsu, Thoth had put Khonsu's competitive gambling spirit and suggested a wager. If Thoth won a game, would Khonsu give Thoth some of his moonlight? Khonsu considered this. That was quite a wager, but he wasn't going to be beaten by his brother. And so they began. Thoth won again and again. Khonsu kept fighting harder to come back, putting higher and higher stakes. Eventually, Thoth had enough of the moonlight for his cunning plan. He had enough moonlight for 5 days. And so, taking that, Thoth created 5 new days of the year. For Ra said, not on any day or night of the year. So with 5 new days outside of the year, Thoth had beaten Ra. Nut and Geb were going to have children. They were thrilled. And so Nut became pregnant. And on these 5 days, each of the children were born. On the first day, Osiris. And at his birth, the air shook with the words, "The child of light has been born. The king of Egypt has arrived." The whole of the country heard this, and so did Ra. Ra was not happy. He sought hard for where Geb and Nut were. This child was not to live. But he could not find them. And on the second day, Horus the Elder was born. And so the sky declared again, a child of Nut is born. Next day, Set was born. And likewise, the sky announced his birth. On the 4th day, a daughter, Isis, was born. And on the final day, another daughter, Nephthys. Ra fought and tried to find where these children were, for one of those was going to take his throne. But with the safety of Thoth hiding these children with Geb and Nut, said they should be tutored. Now, Thoth had noticed that 2 of these children were particularly gifted. He'd sensed them as part of the prophecy, which he did not tell Ra or anybody else. He suggested to Nut that he take the 2 children, Isis and Osiris, into his private tutelage, that he teach them all he can. For Osiris will take the throne, and Isis shall be his wife, and they will rule together. But Ra will be hunting for them and will kill them if he finds them. but Thoth will protect them from Ra's wrath. Nut and Geb were obviously heartbroken to lose their 2 children, but accepted that this was for the best. They took the other 3 and surfaced into the Ra's court. Ra instantly took a liking to their son Set. He was fast becoming an athletic, charismatic young man. He could command anyone. His confidence was extreme. Ra loved this boy. He was a perfect leader. And Ra accepted that should one day, if, on the absolute outside chance that he were to give up the throne, he would like to give it to Set, because this child is an ideal king. Everyone would follow him. And so peace returned back to the royal court, and Ra forgot about these 2 interlopers, the 2 threats to his throne, as he spent more time with Set. But Thoth continued his tutoring of these 2. He taught Osiris and Isis everything he knew of his magic, his wisdom, his knowledge, everything. And both grew in power and stature as they aged. But often Isis would pester both of them and demand, when will Osiris become king? Thoth placated them. In due time, the prophecy must follow through when things are ready. The years went by, their power and knowledge increased, but Isis knew there was more she could learn. She thought she'd learn everything from Thoth, yet there should be more. It was then that Isis found out how they came about, and that Khonsu was almost an equal to her uncle Thoth. So she sought Khonsu out and persuaded him, and she was very persuasive, to impart his wisdom too. And so she learned the magic of the dark moon, and her power became greater than that of Thoth. She almost rivaled Ra himself. The question then came again: when will Osiris return to take the throne? She had her own ideas. She wanted to happen now, and she wanted to do something about it. And now with her power, she thought she could. She knew Ra was the power of all magic. If she could gain his magic, she would be unmatched, be the most powerful goddess ever. And she could then take the throne for her brother. But how? She thought about this for quite a while. And then she remembered what Ra is capable of. What Ra sees is created. And she had a thought, a dark thought. And she took it. One day she crept into the garden of Ra's palace and hid amongst the tall grasses and observed his daily routine, his walk around his garden. And she knew what she had to do. She scraped up some clay, dried clay, and held it in her hand and watched Ra. As he walked one morning, a fly entered his mouth and he spat it out onto the dirt in front of him and then continued walking. Crawling, she took that damp clay and mixed it with the other clay, and using her darker magic from Konsu, she formed a serpent shape in clay and placed it on the path in clear view. Hiding herself once again, she observed for his next return journey, and his eyes sweeping across the garden, reinvigorating the beautiful plants. His eyes also glanced across this clay model of a snake, and the snake came alive. He didn't notice it that because of all the other stuff, but it sought him out and it bit him on the ankle. He collapsed in absolute pain, crying, "Something has bitten me. I do not know what it is, but it hurts." All came to assist Ra, but because the magic that created this was his own, it was extremely powerful, and no one through medicine or magic could withdraw that poison. He began to weaken. He asked for anyone to assist, to save him. It was that moment that Isis made her move. Cloaked and hooded so that no one would observe her identity, she approached Ra and bent down to him and whispered, "I can withdraw this pain, this poison, but I will need one thing from you." Ra said, anything you can have, if this will help." "I need your true name," she says. "If I know your true name, I can have all your power to withdraw the venom and save you." Obviously, Ra knew that would be a bad idea, to give over all his magic to someone he doesn't know. But the pain was killing him. He was breathing hard. He was going cold. He knew he didn't have much time. He had to do something. And he had no way of healing this because he had no power in which to do this. He gave this mysterious person some names, and each time Isis took this name and tried the magic with that name, but it was not powerful enough. She knew he was not telling her the real name. "Ra, I need the real name, because without it, you will die." Finally, Ra could take the pain no longer. "You can have this name so long as you tell no one." And she swore she would never tell another soul of the secret name of Ra. And he whispered it to her. Knowing that name, she was filled with all the power of creation. And she withdrew this poison. The poison dieth, and Ra liveth. Ra was cured. He was never the same after he was weakened. He could not resume the throne. And at that moment, Osiris was revealed and took the throne. But obviously, Osiris Ra had already made it clear that Set would take the throne. And so began their epic battles, which are another story entirely. Oh, crikey. And I got through that one without coughing. Yes. That's quite an interesting story. I like that one. There's loads. If you thank you. There's so the whole contendings of Horus, an epic set of stories. So I might have some more of those on my YouTube. I can't remember. Right. So how are we doing? Oh, we're look like coming up for an hour. Yeah. Right. So I'm going to finish off with some love stuff. Yeah. So what am I doing? Okay. So I'll mention, this is the Free Fringe. We all run on donations. Feel free to give to the Free Fringe if you want. No biggie if you don't. That's not a problem. So what I have here now, there's a set of poems, and it's the most beautiful stuff I have ever heard, called the Songs of the Harper. It's ancient Egyptian love stories. The whole collection is boringly called the Harris Papyrus. Harris Piper. No, it is the Harris Papyrus. But there are a bunch of love poems. They're very much performance pieces, and many of them, while quite rude or quite racy to us, were probably no problem to ancient Egyptians. They were very, very relaxed about a lot of things, but they were also quite clearly alternating parts. So probably won't have the full chance to do the long one that I wanted to do, but I'll give you the two short ones that are the cleanest and that I do particularly like. If I am not with you, where will you set your heart? If you do not embrace me, where will you go? If you see an opportunity over there, you won't find happiness. But if you stroke my thighs and breast, you will be most satisfied. If you are hungry, will you just leave me? Are you a man thinking only of his stomach? Would you walk away from me more concerned with your stylish clothes, leaving me with rags? Remember this: one night with me in your arms are better than 100,000 anywhere else on earth. Now, I love that. That is one strong woman there. Incredible. And this is like new. It is quite amazing, considering this was New Kingdom, so about 1300 BC. That is incredible. Okay, you got modern translation, but even so, that is incredible bit of writing. And looks like men haven't changed really, have they? Thinking of the stomach, more conceit, a bit more conceited, That is, yeah, I like that one. Now, this is my most favorite, especially the very last line. It's a two-part one as well, multi-page. Let's do this right. My God, my lover, I am most satisfied when you come to watch me bathe at the canal, to watch me dressed in royal linen, wet and clinging. Look, I will jump into the water and pull out for you a fish, just for you. So come, lover, come and look me over. My love, she is on yonder side of the canal. But I must cross this water. But crocodiles wait for me. My love for her is so strong. I will step into these waves, and they will be like land beneath my feet. Her arms open wide. We embrace. I am like a man in paradise, like I'm overwhelmed with drugs. Her lips part. We kiss, and I am drunk without beer. Absolutely beautiful, that one. Well, I think that's that hour and a half. We're probably reaching the end. When I did this last time, we went on for like 2 hours or more because people just kept wanting more and more stories. But I'm really melting now. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for everybody else on YouTube land who might be watching this. Comments, watching all my other stuff. Watch the rest of Free Fringe if you're there, or PBH Free Fringe in particular. If you've got, there's more virtual stuff. I've got another 3 shows to do for the rest of this month. One on Tuesday, Friday, and a week on Saturday. So, but there's loads of other fantastic shows. Check them out. And thank you.